Welcome, everybody. My name is Jeff Leifer, and I have the pleasure to help facilitate a conversation today with three executive leaders of a wonderful nonprofit group located in Spain. And the group's name is ICEERS, I-C-E-E-R-S. And ICEERS stands for the International Center for Ethnobotanical Education, Research, and Service. And I'll just very quickly touch on who we have with us today, and you can look at the ICEERS website and see their full bio, which is really worth checking out. First, Ben de Loenen, who's a filmmaker, an advocate, and an all-around change maker on the international level. In 2009, Ben founded the ICEERS organization, which is a charitable nonprofit. You know, what's interesting about ICEERS to me is that it has this very unique United Nations consultative status where, and we're going to talk about a little bit about that work and how ICEERS works at the highest levels of advocacy as well as at the grassroots level. So Benjamin serves as the executive director and has authored several publications and films. He's presented at conferences around the world and has participated in various leadership roles, including as a member of the board of directors of something called the Global Ibogaine Therapist Alliance. Let me also introduce Natalia Rebollo. Natalia has a lot of experience with traditional medicine and shamanism, and is a scholar in those spaces, in those fields. She worked extensively with indigenous communities in Mexico, and she's currently serving as the coordinator of the Ayahuasca Legal Defense Fund, which is a premier program of ICEERS. And finally, to introduce Òscar Parés, who is currently the deputy director of ICEERS. And Òscar promotes educational, drug reform, and research projects on a variety of modalities across a spectrum of geographical spaces. And we're going to get into that today. He's also working on research projects around something called the social clubs. And we'll talk about that, and why that is able to allow broad access, but with accountability, which is an important piece of ICEERS program. And so Òscar is also the organizer of the World Ayahuasca Conference, which is a really significant international gathering of over 1,000 stakeholders in the ecosystem. So welcome, Benjamin, Natalia, and Òscar. It's a real honor to be in conversation with you and bring this important work to the communities, particularly of the K-Dome, the Infinite Playa, and the Ketamine Research Foundation, as well as the other folks that want to jump in with us. I think before we start, I'd just like to maybe read the short one-sentence vision statement that ICEERS has on their website, so you have a little bit of context about this important work. And it goes like this: we envision a future where psychoactive plant practices are valued and integrated parts of society. It's simple and it's powerful. And the core values read like this: environmental sustainability, honoring cultural diversity, respect for indigenous and spiritual traditions, human rights approach, transparency and integrity, evidence-based decision-making, reducing risks and harms and maximizing benefits, and respectful, engaged, and collaborative relationships. So that's a little bit of the context of the important work that ICEERS has been deeply engaged in since 2009. So Benjamin, maybe as just an opening overview, one of the things that's just fascinating to me about ICEERS and has been so effective is the fact that you're working and engaged with institutions and organizations as significant as the United Nations and yet engaged at a grassroots level with these social clubs and working in decriminalization and working with indigenous communities and cosmologies. That's not very common in North America, where I'm chiming in from in Northern California, and you all are in Spain. And it's not really very common anywhere in the world. So perhaps you could speak to how you're able to do it, and how it came to be like that, and why you feel it's been so effective.
Yeah, I think ICEERS is an organization that's really in kind of the liminal space between all of these worlds that you've mentioned. And I think that is important because we're working around plants that come from traditions with different worldviews that are globalizing, no? And meeting kind of the global north in our ways of thinking here. And because there's such a rich cultural diversity, and when we talk about, for example, ayahuasca, we're not just only talking about, you know, a plant substance and therapy or individual use. We're really talking about many things, like, for example, territory, you know, connection to nature, indigenous rights. You know, it's a very broad and complex subject that we work. And that's why it's so important to work at these different levels and be able to detect opportunities. Think always from a collective impact perspective. So it's, you know, in that sense, what you're saying is it's not such a linear kind of strategy. You know, you start from A and then you arrive in Z because of the nature of the plants and the diversity and complexity. It's important to develop new narratives, to engage in partnerships that are, you know, in intercultural and interdisciplinary, and through that advance towards the world that we want to see. You know, and the world we want to see is one where it's not just kind of, you know, only a plant that's you know, available to a specific audience within a specific context. For example, psychedelic medicalization, which is a biomedical framing, but where we see that type of access within a broad spectrum of different accesses and recognition of ancestral you know, systems that surround these plants. You know, you have the churches, the religions. So to make sure that all of those different systems of use have their place, and you know, where we can move towards maximum safety, maximum ethics, accountability, strong collectives, and really kind of, you know, move towards the core issues that we are facing as humanity. And now more with COVID, which is really, I think, obliging us to you know, become one and really think as one in dealing with those challenges.
I really appreciate this, Benjamin, because well, traditional nonprofit structure is often around sort of one cause or campaigning around a certain advocacy platform. And what I keep hearing about ICEERS is, oh, they're an ally for us in the Middle East. They're an ally for us in Northern Europe. They're an ally for us in Africa. They're an ally for us, you know, on the front lines of decriminalization, medicalization. And so it just sounds like that you, with the nimbleness of the organization, your team has been able to facilitate sort of communication at the hub of these different ecosystems, modeling in many ways the nonlinearity of the healing technology, if you will, the healing system that these ancient, in the case of the indigenous, these ancient ways have always been held and offered. And yet, and I guess we'll talk about this later, we are seeing it united with modern Western technology. And it sounds like that can't really be done unless there's somebody at the intersection of these ecosystems. So it does sound like there's sort of a nimbleness and a facilitative role, and yet at the same time, a role as an ally. Does that sound like a fair representation?
Yeah, and I think the World Ayahuasca Conference is a good example of where, you know, the name says World Ayahuasca Conference, and also the Ayahuasca Defense Fund. You know, one might think, and we get that feedback, that it's actually, you know, why only about ayahuasca? It's so limited. You know, Natalia can say a bit more about the Ayahuasca Defense Fund, which we called like that because many of the cases were about ayahuasca, mostly in the beginning, but it's really about, you know, broader plant medicine. But then at the conference, the experience that people had was that actually kind of the ayahuasca or the plant medicine is a connector, you know, brings people of different backgrounds, of different, you know, knowledge and expertise together. You know, we did a policy meeting there, for example, and there were people from drug policy, from human rights, working in indigenous rights, in Amazon conservation, kind of all of these different perspectives. And what they have in common is an interest in ayahuasca. But is by, you know, kind of the ayahuasca really as a vine connects all of those perspectives and elevates our collective understanding of the issues that we have at hand. So for sure, we are a convener. We convene different stakeholders so that we can mutually enrich our you know, understanding of the matter and in a broad sense. And at the same time, we always try to think, you know, 10 years ahead. And a lot of our thinking also around psychedelic medicalization, you know, where psychedelics are put in a biomedical model, which is now, you know, most of the funding and, you know, also the for-profit world is now very much invested in that vision. For us, it's like, okay, that's kind of a step, but really, you know, what comes 10 years later, if we really want to tackle the issues that we have in the world at the you know, at the core, and moving from a revolution in psychiatry to really a revolution in health in the broad sense of the world. And you can only do that when you understand the interconnectedness and how all of these different perspectives can come together.
Beautiful.
So, and you know, another example is like drug policy has all of their narratives and their ways of thinking. And when you focus on plants where, you know, that come from ancient traditions that still are alive today, bringing in narratives from that space also can then help, you know, broaden the views of the drug policy world. And the same in other areas, no, in health and others. So that's what we try to do, really innovating and convening dialogue.
Beautiful. I'd like to bookmark that and come back to decriminalization and medicalization and talk to Òscar in a minute. But let's jump to Natalia for a second, and then we'll come back because you referred to the Ayahuasca Legal Defense Fund, and you made some reference to legality. And Natalia, perhaps you could outline for us the defense fund and how it operates. You're a lawyer and an advocate, but also just maybe give us a quick update on the state of legality with different modalities in the different parts of the world, and then we'll get back to talking about what's going on in Spain and how a lot of what's happening in Spain could be a model for the world.
It's been a journey also through the Ayahuasca Defense Fund. As also Ben said, the name sometimes suggests that we are somehow not including other plants, but of course we had ayahuasca in the first place, then we have psilocybin mushrooms, then in the third place we have San Pedro or peyote, and then coca leaf, in that order. So the legal status of ayahuasca is somehow uncertain, and all depends where we're located. All of the illegal incidents that we've had throughout this time, which are around 152, 153 incidents at the moment, it's an opportunity to know what is the legal status of ayahuasca, because sometimes we don't know. As far as we know, only France has included both botanical names of the plants of ayahuasca into the drug list. Other than France, the legal status is uncertain. What happens is sometimes different countries or judges, wherever they receive one of these cases, tend to reduce all the complexity of ayahuasca just to DMT, as well as other substances. The psilocybin mushrooms only to psilocybin, peyote only to mescaline, and so on and so forth. So whenever we have a legal incident, it's when we have a really opportunity to bring forward all the scientific evidence, to bring all the legal arguments around human rights, around not only seeing these plants as the molecular compounds that they have. They might be scheduled, but sometimes whenever we work with the United Nations, we then confirm that the only 3 plants that are scheduled under international law are the opium poppy, marijuana, and coca leaf. Other than those three plants, they're not considered under control under international law. So this helps a lot to shed light into other countries and then see exactly what is the legal status. So at the moment, sometimes it's not legal, sometimes it's not illegal. So it's in this gray zone where that's where the ADF can, come in and then, of course, help through all the legal process to bring clarity on what is the legal status. So we've set a lot of good precedents in different countries, like in Chile, of course, in Spain, where judges have demonstrated that it's not only they're not only scheduled under national laws, but they're also good for public health.
Beautiful.
So that's the legal status. It's a gray zone.
Okay. So question, is it true that sometimes a case, like let's say in France, that ICERs will scramble to, stand side by side with a carrier or someone that's involved in a case, and then we'll translate the transcripts and then share that with folks in a different country entirely, and that's had influence with a judge because there was precedent even though it was in another country? Is that something that's effective?
Exactly, and that actually it helps a lot that we've been able to connect the ways some progressive judges have thought or their impressions on the results in a sentence or maybe in a decision. So this somehow opens the criteria into the decision makers to also consider other ways of estimating these plans. So that's a lot of the work that we do. We're connecting different jurisdictions and saying, just open yourself and just not only try this as a criminal issue, rather than considering other human rights, considering other elements in the national domestic law. They might also, provide a good solution for a case. So even in France at the moment, which is, a place where it's really challenging, we're defending a legal case at the moment. And, I always say that these cases, we win with science. It's scientific evidence. So it's a really beautiful connection between law, which was really divided from science, which is somehow in these cases coming together again.
Interesting. So it sounds like the very intentional shaping of ICERS itself as an organization to give context to these seemingly disparate ecosystems, but in fact, a lot of intersecting and overlapping core values and sort of orientation and really approach to integrative healing. It sounds like the way that ICERS creates a context for this, frankly, worldwide integrated ecosystem of healing and integration is something that ICERS has been able to bring in specific legal cases to kind of awaken a judge's awareness and consciousness about how to look at a case rather than the usual very linear prescriptive, this is a drug case. It becomes contextualized in a larger way. And from my understanding, some of the judges have even said to prosecutors, these people are doing healing work and I'm seeing a lot of transformative results. I don't understand why you're prosecuting it in this way. You better go back and do your homework. Is that apocryphal or is that true, what I've heard?
That's absolutely true. Of course, it all depends also which country we're talking about. But sometimes also judges won't go that further. I mean, they won't want to set a precedent or be very innovative in the way they decide about these cases. But in the broader sense, of course, this is exactly what is happening. There's a bit better understanding of what this is about. And every case is also a really good opportunity for education.
Beautiful, beautiful. Let's shift a little bit because it brings up an obvious and important point at the heart of ICER's cosmology and value, proposition, mission statement, which is, well, can we keep these cases out of the courts in the first place? That would be really powerful. And so, Òscar, I'd love to hear a bit from you. You've been so deeply involved in the decriminalization of drug policy. I know from speaking with your team that even in the case of Catalonia, working at the grassroots level, which is often not considered the way to change policy or to create advocacy. And then if you look what's going on around the world, including in North America, there's social uprising. It's happening in many regards, particularly around inequalities, systemic racism, the acute effects of COVID, and how it affects marginalized populations. But particularly around drug policy, can you talk a little bit about decriminalization and how Catalonia and other examples in Spain might be a model for how we might be able to shape this in other parts of the world?
Yes, thanks, Jeff. I would like to go a bit back and say that somehow ICERS has flourished here in Catalonia, in Barcelona, for some precedents that make the conditions to be able to connect all these dots and to be involved in these different scenes. And I will comment a couple of them, but I will go deeper on the decriminalization point. But first, I want to mention that because of Spain has a strong connection with South America because of the language and the history, here was one of the first places where ayahuasca landed in the late 90s. So for example, I had the chance to drink ayahuasca with 17 years in the 1998 here in Barcelona, and it was not the first group that was doing that. So ICERS Ben came here in 2009-10, so there were already a decade of movements of people self-organizing or inviting indigenous representatives as well. So somehow this scene was going on. A lot of people had to fight a lot to open this arena so others, so for example, as we can come and do another work, but we are very, very connected to the people who was before in this scene. And the other fact is the political one. So it's both are socio-political somehow, but Spain is not a high degree democracy that has done very progressive change in drug policy. It's maybe the opposite. We had 40 years of dictatorship that it ended in the late 70s because of Franco. Mm-hmm. So Spain was somehow a part of Europe when the UN conventions were agreed. So Spain came late to these agreements, international agreements, and didn't do it at all. So they simply did not criminalize consumption.
I see.
So the sale is criminalized, but not the consumption. So somehow this led that society self-organized in some aspects. I will explain a bit about the cannabis social clubs and other clubs, because there are ayahuasca social clubs as well. But maybe what happened in a wider scale in all Spain, it's that Spain is divided in regions, and some regions, they own some competences, for example, health. So some of the regions were more progressive and took some steps in this decriminalization path. So this opened the field for all the harm reduction. We were the first in, well, not the first, but some of the first in Europe in offer methadone in the 80s, needle exchange programs in prisons, which is something that is not done many parts of the world. And this happened 30 years ago here. Wow. So there was a culture that made people understand that drugs are somehow connected to public health, not only to security. And governments put money in those kind of programs, also in very interesting nightlife programs, with very interesting drug checking programs at rave scenes or in party scenes. So this has been over for 20 years also, and has inspired other movements all over the world. And finally, for example, we have 15 drug consumption rooms in the city of Barcelona in each of the districts. So there's not other parts of the world with this availability of such spaces, even though it still has lots of things to improve. For example, we are working with the grassroots movement of women that use drugs. We are helping them from ICERS, and in the center of Barcelona, there's nowadays one project called Metzineras, which is really going next step driven by users, only women and LGTB as well population. But somehow Catalonia has been a lab, and ICEERS has bring the new lab inside this lab that allow us to connect and to experiment with those types of experiences. And afterwards, not because of the government, so a part of the government, civil society organized surrounding cannabis. Spain is the gate of entering of all the Morocco hashish. Morocco is the first producer of hashish in the world, and it's the first seller, and it all comes through Spain. So in the 90s, a group of people decided that they wanted to get out of the logic of the black market and self-organize. So they say, okay, as it is not criminalized, I can have my plant. We will make a group of 100 people. Each one will put one plant on the crop, and we will have 200 plants. So this was the first collective grow movement in the early 90s. And 30 years after, we have 1,200 clubs, social clubs opening every day in Spain. And the club is a new step because it's not only organize one collective crop, it's also hiring a place where the community that is doing that production can do the distribution and can self-organize. But there are some rules, and one important rule is that you cannot do profit. So it's community-driven projects without profit. So it's not focusing on selling more, it's focusing more in creating culture and on generating new responses to the failure of the prohibition system regarding cannabis. And I have to say that although it's not illegal, it's not totally regulated, so bad practices can happen, and also mafia can try to take its part. So we are on this path of helping grassroots movements to get the regulation they deserve, to stop the repression, and how we can shift these learnings from cannabis, for example, to ayahuasca. There are nowadays a few ayahuasca social clubs, which is more or less the same idea. It's a reduced group of people that self-organize how they receive the substance and how they distribute it, and it's a closed circuit. It cannot be, you cannot advertise it, you cannot make profit. And these learnings, these experiences is the field where we are, and what we try to learn, what we try to bring our perspective, and also connect it with other scenes all around.
Wow, beautiful, Òscar. This is such a refreshing outlook and such important work. I just want to acknowledge how challenging it is to adhere to the core value of inclusivity and accessibility and diversity. It's bandied about a lot because it's very trendy. There's all sorts of frankly legacy organizations, including nonprofit organizations, that are pivoting right now because of what's in the zeitgeist, and because it's very the social uprising is bringing it to the forefront. But ICEERS has had this at the heart of its cosmology for a decade now, and it's just really inspiring. And I'll say that many have been critical of certain efforts here in North America over the past couple of decades around medicalization, and I want to segue with you into a bit about medicalization, but just to say that this inclusivity piece, this diversity piece, and the role of the grassroots, this is not something that comes easily over here in North America. There are some initiatives, MAPS has an expanded access program, etc. But for the most part, there are many people concerned about psychedelic medicine ecosystem in North America and in sort of the very first developed parts of the world, becoming an elitist, primarily white European male dominated ecosystem, and getting into the very same inequality problems we have with a very distorted and unequal healthcare system. So we're inviting major course correction, and we also have big pharma which has typically often an extractive profit model around mental health and healthcare. So just to say props and acknowledgement of what ICEERS has been doing for a decade. And maybe if you just wouldn't mind segueing a bit into medicalization, and then you know, I'll let Benjamin come in and pick up on that a bit, because the medicalization effort, the way that ICEERS holds it, is broad enough to include multiple uses, multiple modalities, multiple geographic ecosystems, and even a place for the indigenous. And that kind of reciprocity and that kind of alliance, we're not seeing that, quite honestly, very much in North America, and we need to.
And can I just add a bit to what
Please, Ben.
Òscar was saying?
Yeah.
You know, like working with the grassroots and helping collectives organize and become strong voices. You know, that's something which at the Catalan level, there's so much experience over many years, no? and we've been involved in. But then also we have seen that that's something we could bring to other countries. And, you know, just like, for example, Chinese medicine practitioners in California at some point all recognized that this is potentially dangerous if it's not done right, no? If the needles aren't clean or there's no standards of safety. They came together, they self-organized, and then out of self-regulation came full regulation. No? And so this is something which we have brought to plant medicine in different countries, understanding that either the illegality or the gray zone, which is the situation in most countries, as Natalia pointed out, really isolates people, and it avoids information to flow and people to learn from each other's mistakes and from each other's expertise. And so when you bring all of those people together and they start to self-organize, to learn from each other, to become a strong collective that upholds, you know, responsibility, collective responsibility, systems of accountability, then really you elevate of that whole collective, you know, the practice, no, and safety, thinking about inclusivity, ethics, and other aspects. And so out of that work, one again very you know, pioneering thing which happened in Catalonia was that then in our engagement with the health authorities in Catalonia, which we have a very good relationship, they commissioned a report, which is a report for best practices on ayahuasca. It's called Better Ceremonial Ayahuasca Practices for Ceremony Organizers and Participants. And this was published by the health authorities in Catalonia. And they knew that this all came out of engagement and community building with the practitioners' communities there. No? And for me also, that's kind of a next level of harm and risk reduction, because I mean, you know, when those collectives become responsible and they have their safety standards and they do good screening and there's a support structure for people who need continued care, you know, that's the way you avoid problems for many more people than just informing participants of ceremonies. No? And so we hope that also that work, you know, as out of the lab can move to other parts of the world, and yeah, and ideally at the end point create professional guilds of practitioners of a broad variety of cultural backgrounds, but with the same ethics, the same safety standards that they agree on, and combined efforts for support structures, no, for integration services or dealing with adverse situations.
Sorry, it sounds like you've really been able to form some loose net coalitions, if you will, and collectives where policymakers, decision makers, as well as grassroots leaders and initiatives stand in solidarity with each other in service to the same goals. This is a model of co-creation that really this kind of healing work, I think, demands if it's to be sustainable. We've seen, particularly in the 60s, and you know, we've seen a backlash from the status quo because of fear and because of wrong-headed government repression. We've seen sometimes this research pushed underground and had a real missed opportunity for decades around mental health and healing. And by doing it this way, you're creating solidarity, but and alliances, but also inviting the cultivation of agency by all stakeholders, and that ensures really a long-term vision. Do you want to say anything more about medicalization at this point?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think the medicalization process, the fact that MAPS has been working for now 30 years, and the fact that there's examples of doing it in a non-profit way, I think is deeply inspiring, and really is a revolution in psychiatry. This psychedelic assisted psychotherapy is really connecting psychiatry with psychotherapy, around compounds that we all know have very powerful, impacts on people. So, moving psychedelics into that context, and then hopefully in an inclusive way, that's a very important advancement. But I think when we talk about plant medicine, the question really is, are we missing out a lot when we take out, a plant, traditional plant, out of a, very complex systems and understanding of health, and then putting it in a biomedical model, which we know also has its limitations. And so, I think thinking of the crisis in the little time that we have, it's kind of COVID is like no bullshit time. No, we need to be efficient, and we really need to go to the core of the matter. And so what I hope to see is, instead of kind of extracting ayahuasca and and peyote and so forth out of these cultures, that we can actually transform our understanding of health by creating alliances, no? And where the biomedical understanding of health is one, but if you have an organism that's sick, you want to have all of the experts of different disciplines and different worldviews coming together, so that all together they weave the understanding and get a holistic view of what's wrong, and then be able to address it from the core. And I personally don't believe that you can really create a revolution in mental health by just putting those plants in a biomedical model. It really
appreciate this.
It really transforms things towards understanding the interconnectedness between the individual, community, the environment, and a lot of those indigenous systems. They have a lot of that other knowledge. So I think bridge building and really coming together as allies and not as kind of colonial relationships is really what's needed, for us to transform.
Such a refreshing perspective, Benjamin. And I've heard you speak to, I think it's the potency of this moment where we're all facing the same challenge, if you will, at the biological level, teaching us and reminding us that we're a biological species living on this planet together. That interconnectedness is at the heart of these cosmologies that you're speaking to. So it's not about holding precious the indigenous and traditional ways. It's about understanding why these modalities have been so effective, if I understand you correctly. I've heard you say, that yahe, for instance, and ayahuasca are rooted in the spirit of place, and that they come to us through these indigenous lineal slipstreams and traditions, and that unless we walk in solidarity with the people who steward the medicines, we can't really be connected to the plant. And I think the final thing that I want to ask about that I've heard you say is that the medicines in many communities, yahe in particular, isn't necessarily taken just for the psychospiritual growth of the individual, but actually for the collective and the continuity of these communities within a larger ecosystem. I think that's such a powerful model, and a little bit hard for the Western mind to grok fully in how to apply that to our current contemporary desire for integrity in the psychedelic medicine ecosystem.
Yeah, and and I've been for many years trying to figure out what is the connection between indigenous, the kind of the indigenous world and the role of plant medicine in those contexts. And in the West, I always saw them as, yes, we need to help preserve the cultures and the people, but that those are kind of two different worlds. And it's not until I really, got deeply into, visiting some of these communities and firsthand discovering, some of these very complex, like the Shipibo dieta system. It's a very, very highly complex kind of surgery system almost, dealing with trauma in a way that I haven't seen anywhere else done in such a sophisticated way. And that's just one system. So I've come to see, like if all of those experts, it's like in a hospital, you have the surgeons and you have the nutrition experts and, the general practitioners and the psychiatrists, they all come together over one patient, and they're now all seeing the interconnectedness of the symptoms and getting to the root cause. That's something we need to do at the global level. And, what's more powerful when, we overcome our differences and with the mindset of curiosity come together with a blank slate and say, okay, what do we need to do together, and create new epistemologies and from that place start the work. And I think with the same money that it would take to develop medicine through the FDA or, drug development context, we could do very, very powerful things as well, in collaboration. And then
I hear you saying, Ben, sorry to cut you off, but just to get this point, I hear you saying that the science and the research and the technology of the North, just in the way, say, like the Pachamama Alliance talks about the alliance of the North and the South, the prophecy of the condor and the eagle. I hear you saying that very specifically with the psychoactive plant medicine ecosystem, there's an opportunity here to work with the science and with the data, as we are in King's College in England and with MAPS and USONA and Hefter, et cetera, Ketamine Research Foundation. But I hear you saying that these two pieces must be bridged and integrated. It's not just the science and the data, that the science, it doesn't take superiority over mythos or culture or the music and the song traditions and the oral traditions, but stands side by side to create an integrated healing modality that is emerging. That's what I'm hearing you say.
Exactly. And then, how do some of those worldviews, when I heard that for, say, a COFAN, the individual, the community, and the environment is really one and the same thing, and healing happens on all of those levels. First I thought, it's a beautiful idea, but then, I kind of started to really understand more as I got familiar and went through those systems. But, for example, Natalia, maybe we can talk a little bit about the rights of nature, no? Which is, what if you take that concept, like nature, is really on its own, a whole living organism, we're part of that. And, how do you, what if laws become shaped on that worldview and not just nature as a, consumer product for, for humans, no? And
right, to monetize. Natalia, please, that's such a spot on segue.
Yes, and there's something about what Ben was saying about just extracting the molecules, which is repeating the same way of thinking that nature belongs to us rather than we belonging to nature. There's also another part of the polypharmacology of the components, right? That these plants are so intelligent and they have their own ways of operating. When just extracting one molecule, you might lose others that we don't know much about them. So there's something about just respecting the whole, ambiance around the plant. And as Ben said, we've seen it with indigenous communities that sometimes it's not only about the plant, but it's also about the community. Healing, itself as one body, as one energetic soul, which if one person has a mental illness or a spiritual illness, then the whole community is ill. So there's something
I think oh boy, they're excited. I think this speaks to really at the highest level, it speaks to Gaia theory. It speaks to the integrative nature of all life and of attunement with the flows of life. So I really so appreciate this. And I know there's so much going on. There was a big conference in Ecuador about the rights of nature, because they have actually in their constitution acknowledged this important element. And ICEERS has really worked deeply to promote this and to support it. These are deeply important points. So it's very trendy to talk about integration, but yet at the same time, we're saying, let's extract these molecules and work with them and have these peak experiences, and then somehow we're going to integrate. Well, it's, that's a mental construct of coming from me doing the integration rather than the plant and the integrated cosmology integrating me, if you will, because I am not separate from nature as a human, and the human system is not separate from the natural system. I think we're getting close, but we still have a couple of minutes. This is a significant point. Ben, what else can we maybe point out is sort of at the top level of priority for ICEERs these days, given the upside downness of the world, if you will.
Yeah, I mean,
also the opportunity.
I think we've touched upon most things. No? I mean, I think our research and our policy work, kind of, it's all in service of that bigger vision. I mean, one thing I really hope is that, because it seems like in the US now, you know, which obviously is a country that is, you know, very much pushed the prohibition model, where now a lot of change is happening also, again, from the grassroots. And the whole decrim nature movement and larger decriminalization is an example of that, for these ballot initiatives. No? And so I really hope that we can, you know, from a small country in Spain, where, you know, maybe sounds like a far away, you know, it's not much to do with the US, that we can be of service in bringing that knowledge. We like to connect the dots and what we learn in, you know, in our back garden lab, to be able to bring that to others. And in Spain, really, this association model, this community model, came about also because they recognize something which is called shared personal use, where I understand that when people come together as a collective to have a ceremony together, that's still personal use, no? And so I really hope that those type of concepts, for example, can be become integrated in the way decriminalization is focused or given shape in the US. And yeah, and again, kind of with all of the work, you know, in organizing collectives from the bottom up, that all of the things that we learn, and we learn so much from those processes, that's really what it's about, you know, mutual learning in all directions, that those lessons can serve, you know, in kind of other countries, no, where
absolutely
collectives are trying to make change.
Beautiful. I so appreciate you, Benjamin, and Òscar and Natalia and your entire team. Really encourage everybody to go to the ICEER's website, to get involved, to support the work that's being done around COVID, around the Legal Defense Fund. Resources are obviously needed, but this isn't a pitch. This is more about solidarity, standing in solidarity in the way that ICEER's has for so many. I invite us all to stand in solidarity with you and just say thank you for your beautiful work.
Thanks a lot, Jeff.
Yeah, thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, more to come. Cheers. I love it. Take care.